Welcome to our 7th lesson, which focuses on advanced care planning and advanced directives. This lesson concentrates on self-determination models for patients being in late-stage Parkinson's disease. Self-determination is an essential pillar of medical ethics. To execute self-determination or patient autonomy, several options are available, such as care planning, advanced care planning, building power of attorney, or making a will. In this lesson, you will learn about some basic thoughts, reflections, and knowledge on these relevant aspects of medical ethics and palliative care. Early on planning, which is supported by health and social care professionals, helps to ensure that the patient's decisions will be respected, even if she, or he, is unable to decide for her, or himself. To execute self-determination, several different instruments are available. Self-determination, also known as autonomy, is not only a legal construct, but is strongly influenced by different socio-cultural and country-specific components. Depending on legislation, different self-determination tools are at patients' and caregivers' disposal. It is highly important to remember that instruments which are to ensure that patients' values and preferences are honored in situations where the patient cannot speak up for her or himself, are deeply rooted within the wider context of medical ethics. The whole subject of medical ethics accelerated after the publication of the first edition of Beauchamp and Childress's Biomedical Ethics in 1979. The ethicists Beauchamp and Childress presented the ethical principles for medicine. These 4 principles are beneficence, non-maleficence, autonomy, and justice. The first 2 of these principles can be traced back to the time of Hippocrates to help and do no harm, while the latter 2 evolved later. With the passage of time, both autonomy and justice have gained acceptance as important principles of ethics. According to Goy, medical ethics is not, and should not be seen as a rigid construct. As societies change, their approach to medical ethics, as well as understanding of ethical principles, has to be adapted and enhanced. Today, it is an ethical obligation of each healthcare and social care professional to benefit the patient, to avoid or minimize harm, and to respect the values and preferences of the patient. Thus, the principle of autonomy or self-determination springs from the informed consent, truth-telling, and confidentiality. Respecting the principle of autonomy obliges the healthcare professionals to disclose medical information and treatment options that are necessary for the patient to exercise self-determination. The philosophical underpinning for autonomy, as interpreted by philosophers Immanuel Kant and John Stuart Mill, and accepted as an ethical principle, is that all persons have intrinsic and unconditional worth, and therefore should have the power to make rational decisions and moral choices, and each should be allowed to exercise his, or her, capacity for self-determination. This ethical principle was affirmed in a court decision by Justice Cardozo in 1914, with the epigrammatic dictum, "Every human being of adult years and sound mind, has a right to determine what shall be done with his own body. Patients with sufficient mental and physical capacity will be provided with options that guarantee the patient's rights and include their preferences." The ethical reasoning typically follows these steps. First, information is given to patient on benefits and risks of treatment. Secondly, did patient understand the information and gave consent? Is patient mentally competent? If competent, what are his, or her, preferences? Is patient mentally incompetent? Are patient's prior preferences known? If preference is unknown, who is the appropriate surrogate? Autonomy, as is true for all 4 ethical principles, needs to be weighed against competing moral principles, and in some instances, may be overridden. For example, if the autonomous action of a patient causes harm to another person. Equally, the principle of autonomy does not extend to persons who lack the capacity or competence to act autonomously, such as infants and children, and incompetence due to developmental, mental or physical disorder. Parkinson's disease comes with mental and physical deterioration, which complicates self-determination. In such case, according to medical ethics principles, patient is seen as a previously autonomous, but presently incompetent. Still, her, or his, previously expressed preferences, for example, prior autonomous judgments, are to be respected. Previously competent or autonomous, but presently incompetent patients would need a surrogate decision maker. Consequently, if patient is interested in self-determination, timely planning is a key. The term, care planning, typically refers to basic nursing planning. This is an essential part of the professional nursing process, to plan, to do the check, and act. In the current context, care planning covers all plans focusing on decision-making in advance. Essential care planning elements are, for example, an up-to-date medication list, stored at an easily accessible place, known to relatives and the healthcare providers. Equally important is a list with the name, function, and contact possibilities of all healthcare providers involved in the care process. Usually, it is advisable to let the care planning process not only focus on medical decisions, for example feeding tube preferences, but instead, to include care wishes, and value-based decisions as well. Care and caregiving often consists of small things, for example, wanting to sleep with an open window, or using one's favorite soap for getting cleaned. As small as these preferences might sound, they support patients' self-determination. Care planning is used to ensure that goals and wishes concerning medical treatment are honored, even when the patient is unable to express her or himself. In Parkinson's disease, care planning for future scenarios is extremely advisable, as Parkinson's will progress leading to increasing disability. For successful communication about the last phase of Parkinson's disease, several aspects are to be considered. It is essential to have ongoing, regular conversations with patients. In doing so, it is the professional's responsibility to encourage open discussions about the dying process. Advance directives and living wills are important tools that should be discussed in a timely manner. They might help to ensure that the patient receives neither under nor over treatment in the final phase. Research has demonstrated that, if Parkinson's patients receive appropriate care, most of them will die in peace. The main challenge, when thinking about a specific advanced care planning model in Parkinson's disease, is the question of when, and how, to initiate such discussions. If the advance directive is initiated too early in the disease trajectory, patients may not be willing or able to discuss this essential information. The reasons for this are fear, denial of death, the hope for a cure, the desire to live a normal life, or to focus on symptom control. If the living will is initiated too late, there is a risk that the patient will have developed dementia in the meantime. A good initiation trigger may be when the patient asks questions concerning advanced care planning. Often the ACP process also starts when the patient is confronted with a crisis, for example an admission to hospital. One aim of many ongoing research projects is to find some more evidence about the ideal time to initiate ACP discussions. Here we show what items belong to a successful care planning process, and should be thought of in advance. When making a will, or other legacy-related decisions, patients need information about local legal regulations. These depend on where people live, and can differ tremendously from one country to another. Healthcare professionals should inform the patient about the spiritual care options. They should help the patient preparing a power of attorney and an advanced directive, and discuss with him, or her, medical treatment options, artificial hydration and nutrition options. It is important to find out together with the patient where he or she wants to die, and to support him, or her, in planning the funeral. Organizing the digital legacy means thinking about who may or may not have access to the patient's digital activities after death. The first step in this direction is to make a list of websites used and the passwords. An address, telephone or email list of people and organizations who should be informed of the death should be created. It is also helpful for the family of the deceased person to have a list of important documents at hand, for example insurance papers. Keys to the car, flat or house should be accessible. Being able to say goodbye to loved ones is important for many people. If this is not possible face-to-face, healthcare professionals should ensure that a farewell is possible by telephone, letter or video tools. Advanced care planning is a concept used to describe options for medical treatment in late stages of disease. It concerns medical and nursing decisions which might occur in the future. It is one of several different ways to ensure that patients' wishes are honored, even when the patient is not anymore able to speak up for him or herself. ACP is defined as a process that supports adults at any age or stage of health in understanding and sharing their values, life goals, and preferences regarding future medical care. The goal of advanced care planning is to help ensure that people receive medical care that is consistent with their values, goals and preferences during serious and chronic illness. The history of ACP is brief. The term ACP evolved in the United States in the 1990s. Above all, ACP is a dynamic process. That is why alterations must be possible always, for example, when the health status or living conditions change. Although ACP is widely used, specific ACP programs for people living with Parkinson's disease are yet under construction, and little is known about their benefits. One main goal of advanced care planning is to ensure that healthcare decisions are based on the patient's current preferences. Ideally, this leads to an increasing sense of self-control, and improves the quality of care. Following the palliative care principles, the patient should be prepared for the end of life, and overtreatment should be reduced. ACP may strengthen the therapeutic relationship between patient and healthcare professionals, as well as improve the quality of care. All ACP documents are designed to state care preferences, if one becomes incapacitated. It is important to remember that advanced directives are legal documents, but not medical orders. Advanced care planning documents are not equivalent to do not resuscitate or do not intubate instructions. Aspects which should be considered when starting advanced care planning with an individual being in a late phase of Parkinson's disease are, for example, decisions on medications, the possibility of intravenous fluids, deep brain stimulation, or consideration of withdrawal. Other advanced possibilities for receiving medication in late-stage Parkinson's disease should be taken into account, for example levodopa pumps. Possibility of gastrostomy placement, if severe dysphagia occurs, or withdrawal. Respiratory support, for example, using CPAP for sleep disorders. Place of care, and place of death. Resuscitation status. Use of antibiotics at the end of life. And withdrawal or withholding of dopaminergic medications. As the topics presented occur frequently in Parkinson's disease, it is advisable to try to decide on these issues when the patient is not yet an emergency, and she or he has still the mental, verbal and emotional capacity to decide on her or his behalf and is able to express preferences verbally. It is extremely advisable to include relatives in these conversations, if it is okay for the patient. Initiating advanced care planning processes is often challenging. Most of us are not used, and often not trained, to initiate conversations on death, dying, preferences for the last phase of life, or what a good death means to an individual. Therefore, these questions may help to start a conversation. If you cannot or choose not to participate in healthcare decisions, with whom should we speak? And if you cannot or choose not to participate in the decision-making, what should we consider when making a decision about your care? Although advanced care planning can be done in many different ways, there seems to be a consensus that there are basic steps for advanced care planning. The patient should consider in advance: what are my values? What makes life worth living? In what setting do I live? If I need more help, due to disease progression, is it possible to get the care I need in this setting? Are there alternative settings or scenarios? Then the patient should, firstly, think about the future. What would she or he like to happen or not happen, when she or he can no longer express her or himself? What is essential for her or his quality of life? Where would she or he like to live in an advanced stage of the disease? Secondly, talk to the loved ones, such as friends or family. One person should be asked to be her or his proxy. Thirdly, write down individual wishes. This includes a power of attorney, which should be stored safely but easily available. Fourthly, make sure that healthcare professionals, such as a treating physician, Parkinson nurse, palliative care team, chaplain, social worker, etc., are aware of the patient's preferences. Fifth, share information, for example about medical records. This information should be reviewed regularly, either for example annually or, more advisably, when the health condition changes, for example after a non-elective hospital stay. Advanced directives, ADs, are legal documents, which illustrate the structured communication process between the patient, her or his next of kin, and the healthcare provider, often a nurse, initiating the advanced care planning process. Advanced directives can result from advanced care planning processes. They are written living wills, in which patients state how the medical, and seldomly nursing treatment should be carried out, when the patient is not anymore able to speak for her or himself. Often authors of advanced directives claim a proxy, usually a loved one, who is able to articulate the patient's preferences, when she or he is not able to do so her or himself. The most important message on advanced care planning is to ensure the availability of documents regarding the patient's future health care decisions. These apply to documents which entitle other people to decide on behalf of the patient, such as power of attorney, living will, advanced directives. Furthermore, people who are to decide on behalf of the patient should know what they are expected to do. Only in few countries, social workers are responsible for patients' and their caregivers' legal questions. When such help is lacking, patients are left for things to arrange by themselves, such as building the power of attorney. There are 3 different types of power of attorney: lasting power of attorney, LPA, enduring power of attorney, EPA, and ordinary power of attorney. A power of attorney means authorizing a person or persons whom the patient trusts to make decisions regarding health or financial issues, when the patient is not able to decide on his or her own behalf. As the laws and regulations for establishing a power of attorney differ widely, we give some general remarks here on what aspects should be considered when setting it up. Anyone who is at least 18 years old and has the mental capacity can create a power of attorney. Depending on the country, the possibilities to obtain a power of attorney vary greatly. Health care providers or social workers should be at patients' disposal for advice and information. How to make a will. Making a will is one tool to prevent conflicts between surviving relatives. If someone does not make a will, the assets are inherited according to national laws. Making a will can lead to peace of mind for the patient and his or her loved ones. However, a will should not only regulate what should happen to one's valuables after death, but should also provide money to cover care costs. A will ensures that property, money, and other valuables get, after the person has died, to the persons who are nominated in the will. Depending on where one lives, the help of a solicitor is advisable or even mandatory in some countries. One should find out how much this service costs before consulting a solicitor. Some solicitors offer home visits, and, or visits to hospitals. In Parkinson's disease, the will should be made in time, meaning not too late in the course of the disease. For more information, patients should contact healthcare providers. For example, Parkinson's UK, a large charity focusing on living with Parkinson's disease, offers a special free service, writing the will via an online tool within 15 minutes. Digitalization has formed the globe in the past decade to a vast amount. So, the subject of being prepared for one's death has reached the digital world as well. So, how to build a digital legacy? How, and as whom, will one want to be remembered after death? Who should be responsible for one's digital accounts? As the whole process of dealing with digital legacies is a fairly recent one. An online initiative, Dying Matters, has defined digital legacy as follows. A digital legacy is a piece of digital information that is available about someone following their death. Someone's digital legacy is often formed by information that they leave online. This may include any website or blog listings about the person, their social media profiles, photos, videos, gaming profiles and interactions they have had online. The first step, when preparing a digital legacy, is to make a list. This list should contain all data, accounts, online memberships, etc. In the next stage, all the access data should be collected and a decision made, what should happen with the data and information saved on this specific account. During our digital lives, we create accounts for consuming, socializing, self-improvement, entertainment. What is to happen with these accounts? All in all, there are 4 different possibilities. The accounts can be conserved, deleted, archived or transferred to third parties. Conserving some social accounts might be a good option. For example, a memorialized Facebook page is set to preserve all of the information that the deceased person shared through the social media platform. In many cases, this means preserving years of status updates, photos and videos, that friends and family, or depending on preferences, all people can view. The second option is deleting your accounts. This might be an interesting experience to execute, after you have made a list with all your accounts. To users' surprise, even if deleting the account is enabled, your data will not be deleted. This might be the case of sport and self-improvement applications that use collected data for development purposes. When thinking of archiving your digital accounts and data, you might want to choose between digital and paper archiving. Archiving is important also in terms of deciding what should be preserved and what should be destroyed. This applies, for example, to private photo collections on cloud, but also documents that are either useless or may harm other people. Those involved in research might need to check and organize their scholarly accounts, thinking of what kind of imprint they want to leave for future generations. Data transfer might be useful if you have accounts with music, movies or books. Significant amount of money could be invested in digital entertainment, hence, transferring should be arranged. Equally, bank accounts and other financial accounts, like brokerage and investment accounts, should be listed, and access and transfer decisions made. Research shows that reminding people of death motivates them to consider their legacy, and causes them to act in ways that benefit future generations, thus improving the overall quality of their long-term decisions. People feel better in the face of death if they are a part of something that will live on after them. Thus, planning for the future, well-organized legacy is a powerful asset. Ultimately, your legacy is all you've got. So, think about how you want to be remembered by other people and act on those thoughts. Or, as Kimberly Wade Benzani has suggested in the Harvard Business Review, give the Grim Reaper a run for his money, by creating something meaningful that will outlive yourself. Whatever option is chosen for digital legacy, all wishes should be fixed in writing. The person who will be in charge of the digital legacy after the person has died, should be informed beforehand and provided with specific instructions. Finally, decisions should be done also regarding one's body. The numerous research projects related to Parkinson's disease intend to better understand the disease, to find further approaches for the disease. To date, there are no therapies that combat the disease as such. The existing drugs are only used to control the symptoms. A large part of the research is in the early phase of the disease, diagnosis, prognosis of its course, but research in advanced phases is also increasing. There are numerous studies in the field of drug therapies. Individual studies are mentioned here as examples. In the advanced phases of the disease, new drug formulations are being tested that are intended to avoid fluctuations in effect, for example accordion, or help in the treatment of off phases, like apomorphine sublingual. A subcutaneous levodopa coupled to carbidopa formulation for patients with gastrointestinal disturbances is tested in a phase 3 study. Different movement therapeutic options are tested in various trials, for example swallowing enhancement by repetitive magnetic stimulation. For research onto the course of disease, brain banks have already been mentioned, which provide important insights into the disease by processing donated brains. But also clinical trials are conducted in this field. They are mainly concerned with the identification of biomarkers. Biomarkers are measurable parameters of biological processes that help to identify a disease, or to better predict the course of the disease. In Parkinson's research, various biomarkers are used, which are either detected by imaging, or determined by blood or cerebrospinal fluid samples, and correlated with the course of the disease. So far, 2 large EU joint projects have dealt with this topic. These are the CLASP project, Care for Late-Stage Parkinson, and the PDPAL, Parkinson's Disease and Palliative Care, project. CLASP aimed to assess the needs and care of patients with late-stage Parkinson's disease and their carers. CLASP took place in UK, France, Germany, Portugal, the Netherlands and Sweden. Methodically, CLASP was a longitudinal, multi-center, prospective cohort study. Standardized questionnaires and tests are applied for detailed clinical, neuropsychological, behavioral and health economic assessments. A qualitative study explores the health care needs and experiences of patients and carers, and an interventional sub-study evaluates the impact of specialist recommendations on their outcomes. PDPAL is an ongoing longitudinal, multi-center, international research project. The participating European countries are Italy, England, Estonia, Greece, Sweden, the Netherlands, Germany, and Austria. PDPAL is financed by the European Union, Horizon 2020 project. The primary aim of PDPAL is to develop and test a new palliative care approach. This new approach is an ongoing care process, in which patients with late-stage Parkinson's disease and their families are encouraged to participate in an advanced care planning process. Methodologically wise, in PDPAL project, a mixed methods approach is used. Mixed methods means the combination of quantitative and qualitative approaches. Donating, storing, and researching brain and central tissue sounds frightening to everybody who does not think of the benefits of this kind of research daily. Being aware how fast the scientific knowledge on the brain and its functioning has increased in the past 50 years, brain banks provide researchers with much-needed tissues. Moreover, a brain bank collects brain-associated research and sets scientific standards. In several countries, brain banks have been established. Despite scientific progress, through the creation of model systems for some of these diseases, previous experience shows that the direct examination of diseased human brain tissue cannot be replaced by any other method at present, because no model reflects the exact situation of the disease in humans. Furthermore, a diagnosis of many neurodegenerative diseases is currently not possible with 100% certainty during a person's lifetime. A definitive diagnosis is often only possible by examining the brain and spinal cord samples taken. Therefore, a neuropathological examination is considered as the diagnostic gold standard for neurodegenerative diseases. Patients and caregivers who participate in research help to improve the care provision as well as carry on the hope for finding better treatment options for Parkinson's disease in the future.